Today with us, we have two candidates for the Rhode Island legislation that are part of the progressive wave that made the national news, the progressive change of politics in Rhode Island. The two are Jonathon Acosta and Leonela Felix. I'm going to introduce briefly the two of them, and then they will each speak for about 15 minutes, more or less. And after that, there is going to be, the floor will be open for questions. Please write your questions in the Q&A window, and we will pick them up from there. So one of our speakers today is Leonela Felix. She's running for state representative in Pawtucket in District 61. Unfortunately, that is not my district. I live in Pawtucket too, but that's not my district, and I can't vote for her. Sorry, Leonela. Leonela's family is from the Dominican Republic, and they settled in Rhode Island in 2002. She went from working at McDonald's to graduating from law school. And she says in her webpage that this was not easy, but she realized that today is increasingly harder. And that is why she is running, because we need leaders who will fight for working families. In her platform, she states that she will fight for affordable health care, jobs that pay a living wage, and neighborhoods that feel safe to all. Acosta, Jonathon Acosta, well, I know him as Acosta. I know him for many years since he was an undergraduate at Brown. And now he's a doctoral student at Brown, so I re-encountered him here at Brown. He was a middle school teacher, a wrestling coach, a school administrator in Central Falls, and now he's a doctoral student in sociology and a council person in Central Falls City Council. And he's running for State Senate District 16. That is my district, so I'm going to vote for him, but I'm going to hold him accountable to his promises. In his platform, he lists that he supports, among other things, a $15 minimum wage, Green New Deal, affordable housing for all, Medicare for all, and the wealthy paying their fair share of taxes. So Leonela Acosta, the floor is yours. I don't know who wants to go first, more or less 15 minutes, and then we will take questions from the public. Leonela, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I don't mind. Thank you for the introduction, Jose, and it's great to be here with everyone. So as Jose said, my name is Leonela Felix. I go by Leo, and I use she, her, hers pronoun. And I am originally, as I said, I was born in Boston and raised in Dominican Republic, my parents' native home. And I come from a mixed status family. So that means my mom was a US citizen, my dad undocumented, and that really has shaped my beliefs and my world views in terms of the things that I want to support and the things that I want to do for my community. I decided to run for office because as an advocate up at the State House, I saw how our legislators are continuously year by year failing our communities, failing to pass legislation that will really impact their lives and impact their well-being and allow them to gain that social and economic mobility, as well as, you know, in the education field as well. It's just investments in all the wrong areas and focus in all the wrong areas. And I, excuse me if my voice cracks, I've been recovering from strep throat, which is not great. So yeah, so I am really working hard here in Pawtucket and really trying to reach constituents and bring a new type of leadership up at the State House. I know that we'll encounter a lot of pushback, especially with the term being progressive has a negative connotation, but in reality is a representative that's for all. And it's a representative that really has those morals and values focused for our community members. And Jonathan, if you want to go ahead.
Sure. We can do a little volleying. I'll share a little bit about myself, maybe later. I actually want to start with being part of these larger, I would argue, historical trends that have converged in the particular moment that we're in. So I'm Colombian American. I'm a first generation American. Both my parents came to the U.S. from Colombia in the 1980s, but we've been here a long time. And I want to thank El Profe for his introduction. And in his life as an academic, he's done some public sociology that doesn't get as much attention. And some of the work that he did was on Latinos in Rhode Island specifically. And so even though he was talking about Dominicans in his book, Latinos start getting here really in the 1960s, the late 1960s. And so we're here for decades and had very little voice, power, or I would argue respect from the local community. We were labor, we were work, we were low wage workers who were coming over with their families. It started off as 3 Colombian men who came in 1968 to work in the mills here in Pawtucket and Central Falls, and that stream of those 3 men grew into a stream of laborers who were coming over and bringing their families. And eventually we would grow from Colombians to Central Americans to other South Americans and to Caribbean Latinos coming over. And it took until the mid 90s to have anybody of Latino origin have any formal voice in local politics here in Central Falls and Pawtucket. So in the early 90s, the state takes over the school district, looks around, realizes there's a demographic shift. So these schools don't look the way they did 40 years ago. But most of the leadership, and at that point, the elected school board was white, didn't look like the students. And so when the state takeover came in, they appointed the first Latino person to their now state appointed Board of Education. And from there, it would take until the 2000s for us to have a city council member elected, which was Ricardo Patiño. And then eventually we would become the city with the first Latino mayor. So I think one historical trend is just straight kind of demography. There was a demographic shift and there was a lag between people being here and getting any form of formal power. But another side that, we get a little bit of a bad rap because of the connotation that progressive has. But in 2016, Bernie Sanders won the primary in Rhode Island. Rhode Island spoke as a highly democratic state and said that they preferred Bernie Sanders and his quote progressive platform to Hillary Clinton. And so the feeling was here, the demand for a living wage, for affordable healthcare, because it's important to note the overwhelming majority of Rhode Islanders are insured. I think at its peak before the pandemic, we were somewhere like 96% of folks were insured. The problem is affordability, really. Most people don't go because it's too expensive. So we wanted affordable healthcare. We wanted affordable housing. We were talking about legalizing marijuana. We wanted access to driver's licenses for undocumented folks, which wasn't a national platform for Bernie, but was something that I think we felt was associated with the progressive side of the Democratic Party. And a lot of those things were already things that people wanted in Rhode Island, but that the party establishment, the people who were in office, were refusing to budge on. And we had been tricked before, right? So as Latinos and as progressives, and especially as Latino progressives, we had been lied to several times by the people who are in office right now, right? So our governor told us during her first race for governor that she was going to give us driver's licenses for undocumented folks. That was a lie. And so I think it was really just time where the demographic shift plus the building up of this demand for policies that benefit the majority of people in the state, the overwhelming majority of people in my district, came together. And they're culminating now in what I expect to be a landslide win on November 3rd, because we did so well in the primary. So for my own story, I'll just quickly share that in addition to being first generation American, I'm also first generation college student. So I did go to Brown, as José mentioned, and kind of went in there as a 17-year-old thinking that I was gonna kind of change the world and make the world a better place, and thought the best way to do that was through education. And when I was a teacher, I realized that something that a sociologist at Brown, Margot Jackson, often says, which is we expect our schools to solve all our social problems. And in schools, what we really see are the symptoms of a bunch of structural social problems that we've created. So we see the symptoms of segregation, the symptoms of poverty, the symptoms of inequality. And so being in a school felt extremely frustrating, and like I wasn't going to get anything done. And so I figured I would start studying these social problems to try to come up with creative ways of fixing them. And of course, you go into academia, where there's this very strict divide between what objective social science is and what being an activist or a public-facing academic is. And I've been one to eschew social norms pretty much my entire life. And so I decided to try to do as much of the public sociology that I could, while still doing some kind of traditional objective work. So I'm writing papers that are more aligned with mainstream sociology, but living what I would consider to be a public sociology in the example set by people like José Itzigsohn. And the reason why I had mentioned him earlier as this public sociologist guy is because as I think about the very local history in Rhode Island, in addition to some of those demographic shifts and the building up of the progressive agenda, I have to acknowledge the amount of work that was put in before us. Like there is no Felix and Acosta campaign without someone like Ricardo Patiño or James Diosa. But before those people, it was the coming together of Latino activists, really, some just people doing straight up social work type work. I think often of Patricia Martinez, Stella Carrera, Dr. Pablo Rodriguez, José Itzigsohn, Tony Afinia, who were doing kind of public-facing academic work, who were coming together and saying, like, Latinos need a louder voice in this state. Latinos need formal power in this state. And that would eventually culminate in the creation of RALPAC, which is the Rhode Island Latino Political Action Committee, that is now, I think, led to the penetration of Latino into formal politics all over this state, from city councils to mayoral offices and now to the General Assembly. So I've said a lot. I'll kind of let Ms. Felix respond if she wants to, or Jose kind of moderate us in what direction you want us to go.
I want to ask Leonela if you want to add something to what you said, because you were very brief. I don't know if you want to add something. If not, we can start with Q&As.
Oh, I love the Q&A section, and so we can start with that, but I'll just say that I am 100% in agreement with what Jonathan was saying. And it is important to recognize those activists and those folks that came before us to get us here. But I think that moving forward, it's a different wave in terms of focus and of what we bring in terms of what we will bring at the legislature. So that was a really good historical context and background. So I appreciate you putting that out there.
Ooh, can I add one thing before we go into the Q&A? Two things. All right, great. Well, one of the things that I want to add that I've spoken to, another one of the folks who's laid a lot of this groundwork is a man by the name of Tomás Avila, who's never held kind of formal public office, but has done a lot of work around documenting the history of Latinos in Rhode Island and in New England. And one of the things that we've discussed at length is how idiosyncratic Rhode Island is as a place. So I grew up, I went to high school and kind of matured in Miami-Dade County. And Miami, New York, California, places with a lot of Latinos, but where Latino politics looks very different. And so in New York, you could argue it's a Puerto Rican space. In Miami, it's overwhelmingly a Cuban space when it comes to politics. And in California and Texas, it's often a Mexican space. And I think that the conditions in Rhode Island made it so that we either had to work together or perish. And so there weren't enough Colombians to have a Colombian political movement alone. There weren't enough Dominicans to have a Dominican movement alone. And when you look around at folks who have come into office, it is because we had kind of pan-ethnic solidarity. And so you needed, if you wanted to get elected, the Colombians, the Guatemalans, the Puerto Ricans, and the Dominicans to really work together, which is, I think, something pretty unique, given my experience with other communities and what I've read about how kind of civic power works in other places. So I think the weakness of Rhode Island tends to be its size. It's a small place. There's not a lot of people. But I also think it was a strength for us and has made it so that I don't think there's ever a time where we could go back to that kind of fractured type of politics where, you know, getting back to my experience in Miami, it was really hard to get people to talk about the needs of undocumented folks because Cubans didn't have that lived experience in Miami-Dade County. Their historical experience was different. Felix talks a little bit about her kind of dual status household, right? Like we had a dual status problem in Miami where we had some Latinos with papers and some without. And often the ones with weren't really standing with and for the ones without. And in Rhode Island, I don't think we've had that luxury, which I believe has made it so that we've forged stronger relationships across these national differences, and we have more of a Latino, Latinx, Hispanic identity than we have in some other places, which has led to the folks that we have in power now. But you look at the Central Falls City Council and the people who are running for office, you know, we have Dominicans, Puerto Ricans, and Colombians all holding seats of power, which I think is rather unusual in the United States.
Thank you, Acosta. Thank you, Leonela. Let me remind you, please write your questions in the Q&A window. Since there's nothing there, I will start with a question. And Acosta was remembering the history, and I remember the 90s when we were, working on the campaigns of Victor Capellan and Juan Pichardo and all that earlier generation. And since then, a lot has changed. Providence have had Latino mayors, Central Falls has had Latino mayors. We have a Latina Secretary of State in Rhode Island. We have Latinos have much more recognition and services. And I remember when, Buddy Cianci used to say, Latinos don't vote, so why should I care? Yes. And that's not the case. No, that's not the case anymore. So a lot of things has changed, and there has been a lot of progress. And at the same time, I look at your platforms, affordable care, living wage, what you were saying about schools, Acosta, and that doesn't seem to have changed. That seems that for all the achievements and all the presence that Latinos have achieved, the questions of, poorly paid jobs, the lack of affordable healthcare, lack of affordable housing, all that that was an issue then is still an issue now. So Leonela, you were saying, now we are bringing something new, and I want to know how each of you is going to address all these things that haven't changed in all these times, and what is the new that both of you are bringing.
I think that and that's a really good point, right? Because we have had a flux and a history in terms of progress for the Latino community or Latinx community here in Rhode Island, yet our social problems continue to be the same, right? And I would actually argue that they continue to get worse with the years to come. And I think that's, in my personal opinion, is a lack of moral values being aligned to our state budget in particular, right? Our budget is a moral document and a working document, and it should really reflect the investments that our community wants to make. And I think that we need to be more strategic, and we need to be more honestly robust in terms of the things that we are doing to be able to address those problems here in the state and, in a particular cities as well. And I see that happening in a way I have seen in terms of community members, in terms of having those conversations, that this is exactly the direction that the community and members want to go. However, when it comes to advocacy and being up at the State House, I genuinely feel that there's a disconnect. And I think that for many, many reasons, social, historical. It's been a point to keep people out of the state house in terms of involvement. And I think that the way to address that is really to bring back the community voice to the people's house. It's a way of looking in terms of our investments, how to invest better and how to invest smarter and more strategically. Because I agree with you. It's incomprehensible why we continue to have these social problems, these social issues, particularly as what Jonathon was saying inside our schools, that are just not being addressed. And we continue to say our schools or our future generations will solve this.
So I agree. I think there are two things that I might add to this. The first is I think that the greater Rhode Island community and some members of the Latino community have a serious false consciousness problem. And so earlier in the year, before the pandemic broke out, two members of the General Assembly, one on the Senate side, one on the state rep side. Actually, Karen Alzate, who's a Pawtucket rep, who's great, will be part of the same kind of delegation, but on the other side of the aisle. Her and a guy by the name of Billy Conley submitted legislation to increase taxes on households earning above $467,000 a year. And this would be reinstating the tax code that was in place until 2006 when it was taken, when it was kind of moved or taken away. And the first person on the Senate side that spoke out against it was the incumbent who I just beat in the Democratic primary. And what she said was, well, wouldn't they leave? Aren't we afraid that they're going to leave? And it blew my mind because I know my district. There is nobody that I know. And arguably, there's a chance, maybe 0.01% of the people in District 16 make $467,000 and above, maybe. But the reality is, in a district where the median income is around $32,000, she was not representing our interests. She was thinking that maybe, one day I can aspire to have that kind of money or something like that. But at this point, she's retired. She drives a beat up car and she rents her apartment. Like, she's not going to get there. She's not going to get to $467,000 a year. We are not going to be the ones paying that increase in taxes. And so she needs to be representing us. And I think the Latino side of this issue is I do believe that folks have come here and bought into the bootstrap myth. In fact, I think my life story is the myth that many people buy into, right? First generation, teen mother, single parent, I made it from a low-income household all the way to the Ivy League. Now, arguably, especially compared to where I came from, I'm pretty rich, materially speaking. I don't make $467,000 a year, but I'm doing well. I'm comfortable. I'm safe. That's not true for most people. My story is the super hyper exception. And so when we think about how we support people and how I even got here, it's through things like having access to food. And that means school lunch programs. That also means SNAP benefits or, food stamps when we were growing up, Section 8 housing, having affordable housing. My mom being able to go to a VOTEC program so that she could get some job skills that eventually would make her a registered nurse, which she is today. And so, a lot of Latinos will turn around and say, well, we had to work this hard. Like, they should have to too. And the ones that are where they are today, the ones that were able to move to Cranston or that were able to move to South County, and there's not that many of them, they need to realize that they were the lucky ones. And there's a bunch of us that got left behind. And so how do we make it so that we aren't left behind systematically, right? Like, I think that a system always lets a few people through to get buy-in, right? Like, it's how you build hegemony. You say, well, you just didn't work hard enough as an individual, but look at this person who did. And so we have, I think, a new generation of people who, the ones who could leave aren't always leaving. And for a long time, Central Falls and Pawtucket were seen as the stop, the pit stop. As soon as you made a little bit more money, as soon as you could save up, as soon as you got a better job, you left. And again, I think you see it with the trajectories of the people who moved to other places in the state. The ones who were here were the ones who are still here, many of them, it was because they couldn't go. And we have a new generation of leaders, including our state rep, Josh Geraldo, including our mayor, James José, our next mayor, Maria Rivera, who were able to, some of them go to college or get some other kind of professional type of degrees, but then stayed. And I think that's how you build up a community. That's how you build not just material capital, but also social and cultural capital and build pathways. But we shouldn't have to do this by ourselves. I mean, we should be reforming a system to do it for everybody, which I think connects to my second thing. In addition to false consciousness, I think we have a framing problem. So when I was debating, or it was a candidate showcase with my opponent, one of the things that they mentioned was in the state house, people always saying, well, look how much we give Central Falls. Look how much we give Pawtucket. And if you look at some of the issues that we're talking about, yes, we may disproportionately stand to benefit a little bit more on some of them, but really a lot of us are getting screwed. In fact, I would argue the whole state is getting screwed. When we look at the education funding formula, listen, forget about Latino kids, forget about Black kids, forget about low-income kids, forget about kids with special needs. Let's talk about a little white boy in South County. Did you know that the little white boy in South County as a per pupil expenditure is getting less than all the other little white boys around New England? Most people don't know that. They just think, look, we spend a lot of money on education. No, listen, even that kid is getting screwed over. All these other states around us are spending more as a base amount. And as the fastest growing population, the child age population, Latinos, is coming in, if you don't make ELL status and the money that's associated with English as a language learner needs an entitlement, right now it's a reimbursement. And so you have to go to the state and ask them for the money instead of it coming automatically. So a district like Warwick, like Providence, like Coventry, because that's where we were going, because that was the American dream, their Latino population is growing and they're not getting the funds that they should be getting. This isn't a CF Pawtucket problem. This is a state of Rhode Island problem, Newport, right? Another place. And so we need to be reframing this as a Rhode Island problem. Don't give me charity. Give us what we deserve. Give us what we need. We pay taxes just like everybody else. You're getting screwed over too. And in the long run, like it or not, we're in this together, right? Like the way that we pay for Social Security benefits, for retirement benefits, for healthcare for seniors is through the tax production of the working age population. And as we get more Latino, as we get younger, if you continue to systematically undereducate these kids and try to funnel them into the prison system, you're going to shoot yourself in the foot, because you're not going to have a base of people working and paying taxes to pay for all the services that this American government has promised you. And so you need to realize we're all in this together, right? Like in order for you to live your cushy retirement life, you're going to need our income tax production. And so it's incumbent on you to at least pay for our kids to have a decent education, to pay for them to have a decent place to live, a safe place to live. And I think with that reframing, we can bring more people over instead of painting it as if it were charity, which is how it's been done for decades in Rhode Island.
Thank you. We have a question from Laura Lopez-Sanders, a colleague of mine here at Brown, and she says, first of all, thank you both for representing us and for your great work for our Latino community. Can you speak about the ways in which you envision providing affordable care for uninsured and underinsured Latino families in Rhode Island? In particular, how can we work to increase healthcare access for undocumented Latinos and for Latinos working in the informal economy? Relatedly, what are your thoughts on relying on private health insurance to increase healthcare access and utilization for Latinos in our state? Thank you for representing us and for your work, your great work for our community. Again, thank you.
I can go first since we keep pushing Felix to go first. So I would say two answers to start with. The first is, on a small scale, we've figured out how to try to provide affordable care for uninsured folks. The pandemic threw us off a little bit, but I'm part of a nonprofit, the Central Falls Children's Foundation, that was founded by a doctor in our community, Dr. Beta Nelkin, who who was frustrated with the private healthcare system and said, look, our community needs care. Not everybody can afford it. Even $20 can be too much for some families. And because we have such high coverage rate in these other ways, and if you're not trying to simply profit maximize, then there's a way to provide services for those folks who are traditionally insured and use some of the profits from that to offset the cost of providing services for those who have no insurance. Now, the counter to that, that's very small scale. The answer that someone that I highly admire, Dr. Michael Fein, who used to be the director of health for the state of Rhode Island a few years back, would say neighborhood health station. So we opened a neighborhood health station on Broad Street in Central Falls about a year ago, maybe a little bit, give or take, a little over a year ago. And the purpose of that is to catch the entire community. I mean, their goal was to cover 100%. I think when they opened, their enrollment was somewhere between 65 and 75% of the community were their patients. And now they had a state-of-the-art facility to go to get all types of healthcare services. The problem there became, and this gets to this second part of the question about private insurance, or really private providers, is, these folks claim to be nonprofits in some cases. So in the case of Blackstone, they're a nonprofit. And when COVID broke out, the federal government was giving out millions of dollars in grants. I think they got somewhere between $4 and $5 million, and they stopped taking new patients. And because they are privately run and managed and so on, we had no voice in saying anything. So we couldn't force them to take on new patients. And so that chunk, that 25 to 35% of the population that wasn't originally one of their patients, if they got sick, they were screwed. They had no options. And so it's frustrating. I think one step that we could take within the kind of realistic legal environment that is Rhode Island is to think about health insurance the way that we've started to think about municipal retirement funds. And so we've kind of forced municipalities. Originally, there was an option. Municipalities could opt out of paying into the state system and pay into their own, which of course led to a ton of mismanagement because executives or mayors weren't fully funding their pension plans, or they were going with the cheapest option or whatever. So in the last few years, we've said, well, that led to a bunch of fiscal mismanagement. We need to pool all the municipal and state worker funds together because that's just more money. I mean, it's how insurance works, right? And so I would argue that if the goal is to have a single provider eventually, one way to at least start is to bring together all the municipal and state employee health insurance plans. So we have a ton of bargaining power with these insurance companies. The biggest problem really is bargaining, right? Right now in the United States, and Congressman Cicilline has been fighting this, but federal law prohibits Medicare and Medicaid from negotiating for pharmaceutical prices. So it's why our pharmaceutical companies can charge us, an arm and a leg for medicine that costs, pennies to make. And so I think if we start kind of fighting fire with fire and saying like, well, look, we have all these subscribers, like these are our people, you need to give us a better rate, or we're just going to go to another company. It could benefit us. And I think it's a step towards a system that's more affordable and that covers more people.
That's right on point with every single thing that Jonathon is saying. I second everything you said. I think that I will add too is that I think we as we know nationally, we have a problem in terms of administrative costs for our health insurance, and we need to figure out a way to how to lower that so that we can focus more on providing the services that our community needs and also making it accessible. And again, one of the problems, again, like Blackstone and others have, is you try to go make an appointment, for example, trying to get some services from your health insurance provider, and you just can't get an appointment. Or, for example, in currently going through it right now with my grandmother who has breast cancer, just simply trying to get her the services she needs to be able to take care of herself. Calling the 1-800 numbers, waiting in line, leaving voicemails. it discourages people from seeking the help that they need in terms of being able to get the healthcare they need and the healthcare that they deserve. So I think that we need to do a way better job in terms of making sure that whatever system we go through is representative of the community that we're trying to target, and that it's able to reach the community. That's why I love so much like the model in Central Falls, because again, if folks couldn't access the healthcare system, we're going to bring the healthcare system to you and make sure that you are taken care of in that respect. So I think it's a very good model to go by in terms of trying to take care of people, but also like Jonathan said, it's just making sure that we do have that bargaining power. As we know, when it comes to Congress and other legislators, we know that the pharmaceutical lobbyists invest a lot of money in terms of making sure that they have the folks that are on their side 100%. So I think we need to shift that power. We need to make sure that those that are serving us are representative of our communities and representative of our interest as well.
Thank you both. There is now a question from Jesse Kingston for Leo. How do you feel your work for the city of Providence will help you be an effective legislator? Thank you for bringing a much needed, more progressive kind of representation to the State House.
Thank you for that question, Jesse. I really appreciate it. So for me, I worked 2 years under Mayor Loiza as the Deputy Director of Policy. And I think in that role, in my previous advocacy in terms and also legal work, I think it really helps in terms of knowing where to look for the answers for the questions that we seek. Right, it's being able to think strategically and looking at what are the things that we need to implement and trying to draft policies that are responsive to the community's need. And I think going up at the State House, it will be really effective. And I'm curious to see as I grow in terms of this role, God willing, in November 3rd, we are successful, is in really seeing how we can using those experience, right? So I'll give you an example. In Providence, I worked a lot with criminal justice reform and trying to bring creative solutions to really persisting problems, whether that is trying to address fines and fees that impact low income, particular people of color in the city of Providence. How can we make that large scale? And I think that the training and the resources that I've gained in working with the city will translate into the state role very effectively, again, not only because of the legal background that I already have in terms of being able to draft bills and being able to look for the answers, but also being able to have those resources, those connections, and understanding what the municipalities go through and the expenditures, the struggles that they already have, and trying to see strategically how to minimize that, but also taking care of our community.
Thank you, Leo. There are no new questions in the Q&A, so I guess I'll just keep asking questions. We saw last spring in the country massive mobilization against police violence, against communities of color. There were demonstrations here in Providence too. And you, Leonela, has in your platform, part of your platform is neighborhoods that feel safe to all. So how do we achieve that? What's your position, both of you, on the question of police reform, police defund, police abolishing police? How do we deal with the questions of safety on the one hand and violence against our communities on the other? Either of you?
I can go first. So a little bit that I didn't address at the beginning. So I had a criminal background myself growing up. So when I came here to Rhode Island, I had some social and emotional issues in terms of transitioning, growing up in Dominican Republic and coming here. So I got involved with the criminal justice system early on. And that led to me having a criminal record for several years in terms of seeing how in Rhode Island and just in general, you can translate that, how people with criminal record are affected, right? So I think, and I'll talk first in general in terms of criminal justice reform, and then also going down into police, because for me, it's relatable. I got arrested here in Pawtucket, right? And in terms of dealing with the Pawtucket police, it's the same thing today. It's a lack of diversity. Not only that, but it's in a lot of ways an abuse of power. And we need to be able to have, if we're gonna have police, we need to have police who are understanding of our communities, who are not targeting our communities, and who can respect the community. I think that the way that you achieve that, at least in part, is one, we need to move away from militarized weapons. We need to step away from that over militarization. But as well, we need to look at that budget. Again, like I said, budgets are moral documents and working documents. We need to look at those investments that we've made in police and make them elsewhere, because as Jonathon was saying, as we've been discussing, we have not addressed our social issues in the way that we should be addressing them, whether that's healthcare, whether that's education, whether that's infrastructure. Yet budgets for police and for military and whatnot keep increasing year after year. It's disproportionately, and its effect is disproportionately affecting folks who are people of color. So I think that we need to, in order to address those issues, one is really move away from increasing those budgets and putting those into more social supports, but as well as making sure that our police department are reflective of our community, that we have more supports. If someone calls, we have more mental health supports, emotional supports, social supports for the community members that they serve.
Thank you, Leonela. Acosta?
Yeah, so I think, so there are a lot of issues that are bundled together in this, similar to what Margot says about schools. We expect schools to solve a bunch of our social problems. We expect police to solve a bunch of the social problems that we have, that we are, it's all reactionary. And so I think some of the things are just straight symptoms of poverty and oppression. That doesn't mean that the system should be responding the way that it does, but it's not that crazy or surprising, I would say. Now, who polices, I think, does matter. And, I like to tread carefully around this conversation because I grew up with a lot of Black and Latino police. There's mad Black and Latino cops in Miami, and we were still terrified of them, and they were still beating our ass, right? Now, Rhode Island has a double problem where we're terrified of them and they're beating our ass, and they're mostly white. And so a lot of times people are like, well, if we just diversify, then, and I think there's two issues there. One, having people doesn't guarantee anything. But two, the United States, I would argue, and this is a little bit of the kind of nerdier public sociology to me, the state exists to enforce contract law. Like, for me, that's what I understand the Western liberal state to exist for. That's its purpose. It enforces contracts. Everything else is just kind of, nice human type fluff, but really it exists to enforce contracts. Now, why do I say that? Because we had an experience in seeing what's possible within US law. And thanks to, and you know her well, former city councilwoman Stephanie Gonzalez, we changed hiring in Central Falls. But the path to that was pretty illuminating. The US really doesn't like affirmative action. Like, lots of affirmative action initiatives struck down. And so the way that we had to write the ordinance that effectively transformed the way that the Central Falls Police Department looks was to eschew including any kind of racial or ethnic quotas. What we said was, you get a boost if you apply and you live in the city. You're a straight resident. Now, in this case, demography works in our favor, right? Like, it just happens to be that we're the most Latino city in the state. But you also get a boost if you speak a language that at least 10% of the population speaks, as measured by the last census. And I think that what made that much more palatable than the traditional kind of framing of affirmative action is that can change, right? So like 100 years ago, that might have been you spoke French because there were a lot of French Canadians here who were working in the mills. And then, 60 years ago, it was maybe Portuguese, because then we had strong Portuguese migration from the Azores, and then eventually from Cape Verde as well. And then 40 years ago to today, it became Spanish. And so the nice thing about that is it adapts to context and to shifts in the population. Now, Providence used to have a residency requirement in their contract, because this is great. This is how kind of like this is how white supremacy works in practice, right? So this wasn't illegal, and what it was at least, I believe it was 45% of the police force had to live in Providence. Now, what starts happening in the 60s, right? Brown v. Board comes out, you have suburbanization, and you have white flight. And so as soon as that happens, the police union in Providence renegotiates their contract and gets rid of that provision. All those people move out. And so most of our law enforcement doesn't live in the community that they're from, and also doesn't look like the community they're from, especially in our urban areas. And so I think one way of getting at this personnel issue is taking ordinances like the one that we implemented in Central Falls more seriously everywhere, right? And I believe that that's true not just for law enforcement. I think that's true for education. I think if you're in the community, you live in the community, you're part of the community, you're more likely to be effective than if you're not. You understand it better. There's less issues of dissonance. And it's just an easier way to build a relationship with people. There's also an accountability that's very different. If I slap your son up as a police officer, and then I see you at the grocery store, or you see my mom at church, there's a different accountability that's informal, that's very difficult to kind of measure, built into a system like that, than when it's somebody that lives, an hour and a half away or an hour and away and just drives in every day to do a job. But the other part of this, I think, is resources, and Felix spoke a lot about this. We expect our police officers to be social workers, to be educators, to be, in some cases, doctors, in other cases, food providers, material providers, and we need to be investing in other places. I really think a lot of this is the federal government's fault, right? So after the Iran-Contra affair, the federal government was under scrutiny for dealing arms to other countries. It's much more expensive to dispose of a weapon than it is to simply resell it. And so it's really during Reagan and in the 90s, when we kind of go the path of mass incarceration, that we militarized the hell out of our police, right? Like, we had stuff, but we didn't have the type of stuff that we have now. Like, we've got cops rolling around in Humvee-looking vehicles. They look like tanks. And it's because the federal government has started all these private contracts, and they don't have anything to do with these weapons. If you're not at war and you have a bunch of war machines, you're not just going to leave the stuff seated in the warehouse. So what you do is you create these grants, and you funnel all these materials and resources to local law enforcement agencies, to state law enforcement agencies. And so the money's not even coming from us. If you look at a municipal budget for how we fund our police department, most of it is just straight salaries. And it's not that I love cops or that I hate cops, but they probably deserve to make a living wage like anybody else. Most of them are not walking away like bandits. And so a lot of the money and the equipment that is used to treat us as war criminals is coming from the federal government. I think that needs to change, and that's where we should be putting a lot of pressure.
And I think one thing I'll add really quickly in terms of what you discussed of the investment, I think there's also a personal investment in the success of your community when the folks that work in the community, when your employees have a residency requirement and live in your community, right? As a resident of Pawtucket, if I work for the police department, I want to make sure that the community members are happy and are invested and want to live here, right? Because I want to see the community succeed, and it's difficult to think that someone, like you said, that will drive an hour and a half to come to Providence or come to Pawtucket or Central Falls really has the same investment as someone who's a resident of that community. So I think there's a personal investment that needs to that it's also taken into account when building these ordinances and changing these regulations and these laws in terms of hiring.
Thank you. There are two questions now. I'm going to read them both, and you can take them in any order you want. The first one from Jesse Kingston is a follow-up to Leo. Given your interest and advocacy in decarceration and work with Open Doors, what may be your priorities in racial criminal justice reform? You addressed this a little bit earlier on in your answer, but you may expand now. And the second question from Patsy Lewis, the director of the Center for Latin American and Caribbean Studies, our host. And this relates to the point that Acosta was mentioning about the relationship with the federal government. Assuming that the Democratic Party wins the national elections, what are some of the differences in policy do you expect between your and the Biden-Harris administration agendas? How will you press the new government, hopefully new government, to shift in the direction you would want them to go? I'm thinking about the new Green Deal, the Green New Deal, the funding the police, etc. And that comment about hopefully the new government was mine, not Patsy's. It was not in the question. I was just expressing my hope that that will indeed be the new government.
I can jump in first, and I'm going to address Professor Lewis's question. I'm terrified of the Republican Party winning again, but I'm also pretty afraid of the Democratic Party winning, mostly because I fear that we would become, as an electorate, pretty complacent. Right now, so much of the conversation is, it just can't be Trump. We don't want Trump again. We don't want, more conservative justices on the Supreme Court. So we just need to win this election. And I was an undergrad at Brown during the first Obama election. And I got to be honest with you, what I can remember from that was hope and change, right? Like that's what we were sold on. And there was a little bit of charisma that we were really excited about, and this narrative of racial justice that we were excited about. And so I remember getting so wrapped up in that and just feeling, what would it be, a nerdy, like collective effervescence, like, wow, we've got this. And then not getting shit in the long run. And frankly, if you just pause at 2016 and don't think about where we're at now, I initially wanted to write a dissertation about how Obama had really done nothing for low-income people and people of color in the long run. And then Trump got elected, and that was not sexy. And I was like, ooh, I would never get this published. Like, maybe we'll do this project in 15 or 20 years. This is not the time. But I say that to say, we were running against Bush, and we had all this other stuff, and we didn't have much to hold Obama accountable to. And I feel like we're potentially getting put in the same position now with Biden and Harris. And so what I would lean on, honestly, is the federalist system. And this is what worked out, I think, for CF in the wake of the Trump election. So, my election onto the city council was on the same ticket as Trump's presidential election. So it was a very bittersweet moment personally. But I remember the mayor of Central Falls reaching out within the week and saying, we're going to hold a private, this was not open to the press, community conversation between our elected officials, our police department, and the community. And we did it at Central Falls High School. We had food. It was a very informal event, and people just spoke. And this was mostly because of a lot of immigrant anxiety of Trump's anti-immigrant rhetoric. And the police department here wanted to make very clear to the community that it was our police department, not the federal government's, that they were not going to cooperate with ICE, that they understood kind of who they served, so on and so forth. And, without making them seem too benevolent, what that really showed me was, oh, okay, so under this federalist system, we're not necessarily completely tied to these to these administrations. And so at the local and state level, what I envision happening after Biden and Harris get elected is I'm not too hopeful that they have a serious Green New Deal platform. But luckily, we've been whipping up support, not just for a Rhode Island one, but for a New England one. So if you haven't heard about Renew New England, what it is a regional Green New Deal. And I think the reason why that's so important, and I'll quote another person from our department, a guy by the name of John Logan wrote a book, Urban Fortunes, in the late 70s, early 80s, where he talks about how cities are seen as these growth machines, and cities and states are forced to compete with each other, right? So I think that the best contemporary example of this was the Amazon HQ2 headquarters. And really, it was a race to the bottom between cities and states, right? Like, who can give as much as possible away to this corporation just so they will grace us with their presence. And what that means is huge tax breaks, right? Like, you're going to go 12 years without paying taxes. Don't worry. We're going to give you land for $1 lease or something like that. So this is just absurd deals. And so I think that this regional approach to the Green New Deal is really, really encouraging, because it shows that states are starting to realize, hey, we don't just need to compete with each other. We should be coming together and saying, hey, look, you're not going to threaten to leave me for Massachusetts. In Massachusetts, they have the same expectations. In Vermont, they have the same expectations. In New Hampshire, they have the same expectations. But I would not be too hopeful about expecting anything from Biden Harris. I mean, what we can expect is it's definitely not Trump. So we're happy about that. And then we have to keep their feet to the fire and keep moving at the local and state level, because history has shown that we should be cautiously optimistic, if that.
I echo the exact same thing. It's true that with this, and I'm sorry I keep saying that, but it's absolutely true. I don't feel hopeful. In a way, I do feel hopeful that it's not Trump. 4 years of this crazy BS, it's more than enough. I think for my lifetime, I hope, and for everyone else's as well. But I just don't think that they are committed enough in terms of doing the issues that we want to do, like the Green New Deal, or even reforming our police departments and the relationships. And I just don't think that that's going to be the case. I also want to say that in the last 4 years, the Trump administration has undone a lot of regulations. There be environmental, be immigration, instituted new policies that is going to take years to be able to even, if at all, get back to where we used to be in terms of protections. So one of my concerns is, how can you focus on moving forward when I feel they're going to be wanting to put things back to the way that we used to be, and then we're going to be complacent at that. Well, it wasn't as bad. Then now we're back to what, 10? We should be happy, and we should be complacent at that. And I think that we get tired. So right now the conversation is, we're doing this, we're going to be strong, and we're going to hold people's feet to the fire. And I hope we do, but I feel like also we get really, really tired in terms of being able to do that. So I hope that we don't, and I hope that past the election, and I knock on wood that it is a Biden Harris ticket and that we do win. But again, I'm not that hopeful that things will be completely good afterwards.
Thank you. Do you want to address the question about
I'll
priorities in racial criminal justice reform? Expand on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I know Jonathan wanted to say something.
Yeah, I'll say two things about that. One practical and one a little bit more abstract. I think, you know, and we haven't talked too much about marijuana legalization yet, but it was definitely one of my top priorities. And part of that is because it was used for so long to criminalize a particular community. So I often quote the Van Jones anecdote about attending Yale, right? He says something like, I spent my early 20s in a drug-infested den with no consequences and tons of criminal activity called Yale University. And that's honestly a big part of what my experience as a Brown undergrad was, feeling like, you know, I grew up in a community that had been completely stigmatized because of drug dealing and narco trafficking. I did admittedly have some family members that were involved. I was never personally involved. And part of it was like, because there are so many people like this, you have to be extra good. You have to like never get in trouble. And it was almost like a paranoia. And I was a single mom and only son. So it was very overprotective. I got to Brown and everybody was high. I mean, like they were smoking in public, blowing weed in like DPS officers' faces with no consequences. And this was, 2007. This was before the kind of wave of recreational legalization around the country. And so I remember just having my mind blown and calling my mom and be like, Mom, maybe smoking weed's not going to get us arrested for life. But it was really eye-opening for me. And so I think as part of legalizing recreational marijuana from just a straight fiscal perspective, right? Like it's a great source of income. Right now, we're hemorrhaging cash to our neighboring state. The closest dispensary to me is 12 minutes away in Attleboro. They charge 12% taxes on purchases. So they're making money. And we could be doing that. But it's also the right thing to do, recognizing that mass incarceration was wrong, that the criminalization of marijuana was something that happened within our parents' and grandparents' generation, that it was used to try to diffuse the hippie peace movement, to try to target the Black Panther movement, and then to ultimately like put us in jail for long periods of time, many of us. And so I think that needs to come with expungement. I think it needs to come with funneling the profits from that tax revenue into community development, into paid positions for social workers. Right now, we have a grant where we have a social worker that rides with one of our patrol cars 5 days a week in Central Falls, which is really great. But if that grant expires and there's no money, then we're out. So we could be permanently funding some of these very innovative solutions through these revenue sources. The kind of more abstract thing that I struggle with on a personal level, but I realize I'm not a religious person per se. My family is pretty pious, but I am a follower of Tolstoy, and one of the things that always struck me is his comparison of the way that Christians speak about the New Testament, but how committed they are to the Old Testament. And I'm speaking specifically of this eye for an eye mentality, where we believe that we need to punish everything. I think that permeates not just our legal system, but also our like one-on-one interactions. You know, this literally happened 2 days ago. I think like some kids egged my house, and I was like, man, if I catch those little, like, I'm gonna like punch a kid in the face or like wring their throat out. And I was like, you know what? They're being kids. Like, it's okay. Like, I get it. Like, I remember being a kid, and the fact that my automatic response was, you know, I need revenge. I need punishment. It's so quintessentially American, and like American Christian in particular. And I think we need to start really looking at how often our initial reaction is revenge or is punishment, and then build out to a system that no longer treats any kind of, you know, misdeed in that way.
I agree in terms of the marijuana legislation. It's something that I'm really looking forward to working on up at the legislature. With me, I've been working at the city level in terms of looking at ways to holistically support folks, because we need to be able to recognize, right, that yes, we have criminalized people of color, low-income people in terms of marijuana. And if you look historically in terms of drug criminalization, right? Look at what marijuana is in terms of classified. Look at cocaine, right? And who uses it and how that gets charged and the penalties that come with it. And now we're moving away from decriminalization, and then we're also looking at legalization in other places. And fiscally, it's a responsible thing to do. And I agree with the expungement. The thing that I will add in terms of the expungement, and that's my caveat in supporting a marijuana legislation, is if it's not paired with a clean slate program, I will not support it. And the reason that I say that is because we have profited, or we seek to profit from the benefits of having marijuana legislation while not targeting those that have been affected by it. So for example, right, we have folks who may have been on probation and parole and may have been caught with some marijuana and then were violated for the probation and parole, were incarcerated, may have still a criminal record from it. Under Rhode Island law, in order for you to be able to expunge your record, if at all you qualify, you need to submit an application to the court. You need to pay $100 to the court. You miss a day of work or school or whatever other responsibilities you have to show up in court. Then they expunge it. Then you file the paperwork. And then maybe, probably, maybe not, you get your record expunged. It's not an automatic thing. Whereas, right, what I mentioned when I say what I mean when I say the clean slate program is an automatic expungement. Is you don't have to apply, right? If you had a marijuana conviction in your record or a marijuana charge in your record, it means that we will put the onus on, and city of Durham and other cities have done this, where they use their public defenders, they use law school students to be able to identify who are those folks that would qualify, right? And in some jurisdictions, what they did was literally delete in a computer and erase all those records and send notifications to the folks, because again, that has implications in terms of driver's license, whether or not they suspended when it comes to a criminal record. It has whether or not you can qualify for housing, whether you can qualify for certain programs. So I think that in terms, particularly with marijuana legislation, I think we need to really think critically in terms of how have we affected the lives of folks and how can we fix that? Because it is, I see it personally as our responsibility to do so, because through legislation, we screwed people's lives up. Now through legislation, we should be able to fix it before gaining the revenues of that. In terms of revenue, what I will say is that we know that the way that for some reason or it's done here in terms of dispensary, just to be able to start, what you need a capital of like $50,000, $25,000, I think it is. I know that at one point it went down to 100. I don't even know exactly the amount. I don't know if Jonathan, if you know the exact amount.
The license, there's 4 licenses active right now. They each cost $500,000 a year.
I don't know about you, but I certainly don't know any way in hell that I can get that amount of money in terms of opening up the dispensary whatsoever. But if you do, we should talk, because you know I would love to gain that capital. But it's inaccessible. It's completely inaccessible. It's irresponsible. I don't know why in the living hell does it have to cost that much. But the way that I see it is that we need to create sort of like the city and others have done in terms of hiring, like the MBE, WBE program, where if you're a minority-owned business, if you're a women-owned business, you get that percentage, or in Central Falls, in terms of living in the residency requirement or language, you kind of get those points. I think there should be a system, and there needs to be a scale in terms of the money required in investments. Also, what other jurisdictions have done in terms of being able to diversify who owns the dispensaries is making sure that people can go into partnership with others, right? So for example, Jonathan and I and other leaders, or everyone on this call, let's just say, we're all gonna join together into this sort of a co-op, and we're each gonna have a share in terms of being able to own a dispensary. And that's the way that some places have done it. Now other cities have actually prohibited that. So again, it makes it inaccessible for people of color, low-income people to even be able to apply. So I think that there's ways for us to think critically in terms of marijuana and how to fix the ills that we've caused throughout the years. Other, in terms of answering the questions that I think other priorities that would be beneficial is, again, I try to do it here at the city. It hasn't worked. It's decriminalizing our state statute. We have a lot of stupid offenses by which we criminalize people, by which we fine people. And we know it's just anything from like an open container, for example, you can get a charge for that, or disorderly conduct, for example, for minor things like nuisance, like playing your music too loud, things like that, that we need to be able to look critically at what are those charges, what are those offenses that we are overusing to criminalize our community, and fight and go through it and really decriminalize it, because a lot of it is antiquated. A lot of it we know is targeting certain communities more than others. And we need to be able to equitably try to level the playing field when it comes to criminal justice reform.
Thank you. As we wait for new questions, I have one. Rhode Island is a blue state, but the State House delegation is pretty conservative, particularly in the Senate, although it's true for the House too, but it's particularly true for the Senate. And you come with really a very ambitious platform and wanting really to move the agenda of the communities of color and the poor communities forward. So how do you plan to get that agenda through in what is not so friendly state house?
Yeah, I'll go first, and acknowledging that you can't do any of this alone. And I think you also need to check your ego at the door. So as a as an admitted occasional narcissist, what I'll say is that people in politics have ridiculous egos. And in particular, what I've found is people really want credit for being the sponsor of the bill, or the person who came up with the bill, or because of some type of interpersonal beef, won't vote for a bill that's a good bill because they don't like the person who's the sponsor of it, and so on and so forth. So all that to say, like, I'm going in with a very clear mind that I might not like somebody, but if the bill is good, I'm voting for the bill. And that needs to be, and vice versa. Like, I might love somebody, but if the bill is trash, you know, just because you were invited to my son's birthday, like, don't expect that I'm going to vote for a trash bill. And so I want to, live that way. And I've done that on the city council thus far. And we had a member who, there was, you know, it was no secret that he was hands down the most disliked person on our council, and lost his next race. But there were times where he raised particular points or was behind some bills that were good. And when he did that, like, I stood by him because it was the right thing to do. When he didn't, you know, it's like, all right, I wish you weren't here, but but that's okay. And that leads to this next part, which is you can't do this thing alone. And so as much as I admire Bernie Sanders and have stood by him in the past, and, you know, I've spoken out for him and kind of endorsed his candidacy as a represented, as an elected official myself, I think part of the problem was that he was way too late to, like, the AOC and the freshman force game. He should have been playing that game 30 years ago. Instead of standing up there being like, I'm the one who's right. Look at all this data. Look at it. No, man, you need a team. You need a squad of people. And so I knew going into this race that at the local level, I had my people. We had been building this for, you know, over a decade. And so the front runner for the mayoral race had my back. A bunch of the council members had my back. I had no fear at the local level. What I knew that we needed to get anything done at the state house was a statewide movement. And that's why I became a member of the Rhode Island Political Cooperative, which some people might not be aware of, but it's a group of progressive candidates who all came together. I think the final slate was 25 of us, running races across levels of government. So we had people running for city council races, we had people running for state rep races, Senate races, and so on. So coming in, we all had to agree to a baseline platform. And so the great thing about that is day one, after we're inaugurated, you know, we know who's voting for what. And if not, I the first thing I said in the first meeting was, I'm looking forward to when we have to kick somebody out. I think we almost need to make an example of somebody who doesn't hold up their end of the bargain. And if it was me, I would be happy with it being me. You know, like, you agree to these policy platform positions. If you don't vote for them, if you don't sponsor them, then you're out. And I think we need to have that level of conviction and commitment. And so now that we have a bunch of those people who have won their races, the key is, you know, all right, you need to work this angle. So you work the minimum wage thing. I'm going to work the education thing. You're going to work the health thing, whatever. And we know we have the votes between us as a group, but that way we don't have to worry about being stuck in a silo, only working on a thing. Because one of my issues with some of the organizations, and I'm not, fuck it, I'll throw them under the bus. Working Families Party, I think they do great work. When Working Family Party was coming to me about and contemplating an endorsement, one, you know, they felt like they were going to spread their resources too thin. Two, you know, I didn't commit to the $15 living wage being my main priority. I said, no, I refuse to tell you that this is the only thing I'm going to work on. Like, I need to be working on multiple fronts. But bringing a minimum wage is not going to be enough for Central Falls and Pawtucket if we don't work on our schools. It's not going to be enough if we don't have affordable healthcare. It's not going to be enough if we don't have a place to live in the form of affordable housing. So no, I'm not going to commit to that being the only thing. And yes, like, I'm angry and salty that you didn't endorse me, but if you have a good bill, I'm still going to vote for it. And I'm still going to open that meeting saying, don't think I forgot, and F you, but let me see that bill. If it's good, you got my vote. You know what I mean? And so I think that mentality, but also having a group of people that's willing to operate with that mentality, is super important and something that's never happened. And I think part of why it happened, being in the group that I'm in now, is we had Janine, who was up there on her own, Janine Calkin, a state senator out of Warwick, who was up there on her own playing the Sam Bell type game for a term, and then got ousted and realized, like, oh, I can't do this alone. We had Matt Brown, who was the other co-founder of the group, who ran for office by himself and fell on his face and was like, oh man, turns out I actually need a bunch of people behind me too. And so now having these people, doesn't matter if I lose, doesn't matter if in 2 years, they try to run somebody against me and I'm out. There's a whole bunch of other people. There's a whole bunch of Felixes and Acostas in there with the same policy commitments that are going to vote that way and get those things passed. And now there's other organizations. I'm really excited about the Sunrise Movement. These young people are fearless. Not only are they engaged and working their butts off to get people elected, they're making threats. And so they've already drawn a line in the sand and said, listen, if you vote for the leadership that's in office now, in 2 years, we commit to running somebody against you. So you better know someone's got a ticket out for your butt. And we hopefully won't be in a pandemic in 2 years. And you're going to have a ton of young people hitting the ground in your district, convincing people to vote for their candidate. And so you better be ready for that if you think that just going with the status quo is going to be okay.
And I'll say in terms of the blue state, it's more like a purple hue rather than blue, because again, that conservatives base is just not, I don't know how in the living twilights can you call yourself a Democrat and do the things that I was gonna swear, the things that you support up at the damn state house. I'm really trying my best to be good while on this panel. But because again, it's just ridiculous. One of the other faults or flaws that I see in those that are currently serving is, as someone who's advocated up at the state house, I would come forth and say, I don't know, immigration bill. An immigration bill was introduced. That's my area. That's what I know. And I'll be like, oh, so why are you submitting this bill? Because, blah, 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 whatever the reasoning I was bringing. And then there will be, well, my constituent expected. So what would the bill do? I don't know. I submit it every year. And I would sit in a meeting like, wait, hold on. Have you done no research on what your own bill would do, right? Nothing. Or another bill, I would come to folks and talk to them about it, and I would be like, if we amend this section, it would be better. No, that's my bill. And it's just me. I own this. Screw all of you. I'll run it the way that I want to. And the problem with that is that, who are you then doing it for? Are you doing it for the community that you serve, or are you doing it for yourself because you want to be the one that passed the bill, the one of the 5 names in the front? I don't care if my name never comes up in a bill. I don't care about it. I think one of the hardest things for me to run was to know that I would be out here like as a public figure, because I'm a very private person. I just don't care about the limelight, right? Like Jonathan said, if there's a good bill out there, if I don't like you, I don't like you, but I'm supporting your bill because it's going to be beneficial to Pawtucket. It's going to be good for our residents and our community members. And I think that in there's just too many folks that are salty as hell and just don't want to do the right thing, don't want to put the work in, don't want to listen to the community. And yeah, I definitely agree in terms of these new organizations that are coming through, like Sunrise and Reclaim. They came through for my campaign and they were out here knocking on doors every single day. So hell yeah, that if there's someone that votes for the leadership and votes the wrong way, that they're coming for them, I will be standing out there in line, knocking on doors for them as well, because there needs to be accountability with our leaders. It can't just be, there's a saying in Spanish, de la boca para afuera, that you're going to do this. What's the translation? Like just a mouthpiece that you're just going to do this because you're going to do this. No, there needs to be accountability, that if your words should be holding you accountable. If you say you're going to do something for your community, that your feet are held to the fire and that you do what's right for your community. And the platform that you ran. So I think that's one of the things that I'm really looking forward. I think in order to do the changes that we want to do, and not only with the co-op, but I think that we need to all come together. I think even if those, like I didn't run with the co-op, I did run with WFP, but I think that we all have the same goals in mind and the similar platform, if not almost the same platforms in terms of running. And I think that it would be ideal either to create a caucus with all of us, or even if it's just coming together and let's have an honest discussion and figure it out. That way, again, like you said, Jonathan, like you already know who's voting how, and you know that we can focus our angles in different ways and utilize our resources more effectively to make a bigger impact in the legislature.
Well, we are nearing the end of our time. I just want to say, having witnessed the history of Latino mobilization and elections and empowerment in Rhode Island, I agree with what Leonela said at the beginning, that we need a new, we need a 2.0 stage. We need a new start, because we achieve a lot, but as we were saying earlier, there is a lot that we didn't achieve, and I think that the things that you were talking about, the Rhode Island Cooperative, the Working Families Party, the New Sunrise Movement, are movements that give us hope that we will move into this more, this deeper agenda, not just representation, not just being heard, but addressing the structural problems that affect the communities. So as we end this conversation, I just want to give the two of you the opportunity to just say, your final message. I mean, and this event with, what with, your final message to the audience. And this is being recorded, so people are going to watch it. So just the last word is yours. So.
I'll end first, since you opened. I'd say at a personal level, you always gotta, because we're still in the middle, right? Or like 1.5 weeks out from campaign. So, if you're interested in learning more about our campaigns, you can see our website, or my website, www.jonacosta.com, or we're on Facebook, Acosta for RI, and check out the Rhode Island Political Cooperative. There are two really important races that we're still trying to win, that it's coming down to the wire. The other two quick things that I would say. The first is that it's my hope that we create a different type of political culture here in Rhode Island, but also in the U.S. I feel like it's turned into this thing where it's so cyclical, and we're only paying attention during election years. We're only paying attention in the last 2 months before an election. And I think we need to have a different type of engagement and explore what that looks like in our time. And so I'm not a gamer, but AOC jumping on Twitch and playing video games was arguably the biggest GOTV event of the year so far, and that's super dope. But the way that people are embracing podcasts now, and you don't have to be white and drink your coffee on your drive to work in the morning and listen to NPR. There are other options. There are other people covering the content. Profe, I just read the article that you assigned for the class that I'm teaching, so that was on the mind. But there's a way to stay engaged, to know what's happening, to know who's in elected office and what bills are being heard. And so I would encourage everyone to please do that. And the slightly more somber but still kind of optimistic thing that I would say is, I don't think we're gonna see what we hope our world becomes, and I think that's okay if we're working and moving in the right direction. So I don't think those three men in 1968 could have imagined having a Colombian mayor 45, 50 years later. I sure know that my parents couldn't have imagined me being on the path to be a college professor and have doctor in front of my name one day. But we're doing that. And so I think if we keep working, we're going to get to a world that's better than the one we're in. I'm a little bit of a pessimist in saying, like, we're too jaded to be the ones that live it, but we can at least contribute towards building it. So please be part of that. And thank you, Profe and Clax, for putting this together.
In terms of, but I am a gamer, so that AOC video was just on point and made my life so much better. So if you haven't seen it, folks, please go watch it. It's super interesting. I say get involved. We can't really do this alone. We just can't do this alone. And not just us, right? In Rhode Island, the primaries are more important than the general. And we don't have people coming out for the primaries. Our turnout are so low. it makes me want to cry. Like it shouldn't be that way. I mean, I understand why folks don't get involved. We have been disillusioned for so many years, but it makes me hopeful that beyond this administration, in terms of Trump, beyond everything, that we will continue with this fire in our belly to be able to get more engaged, because we can't pass those bills that we've been talking about, or create those movements that we've been talking about without without the community support, right? And that means, as much as it sucks, donating to your local candidates. If you can, go knocking on doors, go phone bank. Like Jonathon says, there's a lot of races right now that are on the wire and that need your support. So I think it's important to recognize that, and please go support them. And also, if you want to support my campaign, leonelafelix.com, or on Facebook, Leonela Felix RI. You can find me there. But I am hopeful that we are going to make this change. I want to say thank you to all of you for inviting me to be on this panel. Jonathon, is the first time that we serve on a panel, or, so I'm super grateful for you and the opportunity to be able to have this conversation with you as well.
Well, thanks to you both, and thanks to the people that have stayed until this late hour to hear to us, and thanks to everybody who will watch this online, or that will watch that will connect, will see it in YouTube or wherever it's posted. So, and I wish you both success in 3 weeks, and hopefully it will be the beginning of a great progressive wave in Rhode Island. So, looking forward to it. Thank you.